Welcome to Penn State Dickinson Law's Profiles in Leadership series. My name is Daryl Lim. I serve as the H. Laddie Montag Junior Chair and Associate Dean for Research and Innovation at the Law School. This series offers an opportunity to glean insights from the leaders that we are inviting on this program to reflect on their skills, their journeys, and core values and qualities that make them the leaders they are today. In this episode of Profiles in Leadership, we speak to Noland Cheung, who is a seasoned intellectual property attorney and strategic advisor whose career spans leadership roles at Bayer, Dentons, and now Eckert Seamans. A proud alumnus of Penn State Dickinson Law and a member of our advisory board and the IP and Innovation Initiative, he brings professional distinction, service to the community, and a commitment to mentoring the next generation of leaders. Noland, welcome. It's great to have you here.
Good morning, Daryl, and thanks for saying seasoned instead of old. Appreciate that.
Well, let's take you to the beginning and please talk about your formative years, where you were born, your childhood, law school, especially law school, and your early working life.
Oh, thank again, Daryl. Thank you for the opportunity, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk to our friends and family from Dickinson. But boy, we go back a little bit ways. I was born in the '60s, in the New York City, and my parents obviously were Chinese Americans, or not Chinese Americans, but Chinese. And my father came over from Shanghai, Hong Kong, and my mom was from an island, the richest island in the world called Borneo, Brunei, Borneo. And so they immigrated to the United States in the '60s. Dad went to University of Oklahoma. I was born in '65 and grew up in New York City. Um, we then migrated from New York City into New Jersey, where my dad spent all of his career at Bristol Myers Squibb as a lab scientist. And that is really, I mean, he was really my first foray and very influential in me going into the science route because that was all my dad was science. You know, I remember, he was very strict in education. My first language was Chinese. I didn't really know even any English when I was growing up because we could only speak Chinese at home. And so I remember he was very strict, and he made me, as a short story, he made me learn the times table in Chinese. And so it was very good because I won all the times table competitions in elementary school, but it was very helpful. But grew up in South Jersey, moved to Willingboro, New Jersey, went to Willingboro High School. Very good childhood. My mom owned a Chinese restaurant, Sichuan hot and spicy food in Cinnaminson, New Jersey. And and then my dad said, Nolan, he goes, I'm a scientist, I'm a chemist, so you should do one step above me. He goes, you should be an engineer. And I go, what's an engineer? He goes, well, you do something with equipment and make chemicals and so on. I go, it sounds good. And so I had the opportunity to go to Carnegie Mellon in Pittsburgh and remember driving my dad's Volkswagen station wagon with all my stuff to Pittsburgh for the first time. And, did chemical engineering and public policy, which was my first foray into sort of law, the public policy aspect, double major at CMU, and really enjoyed it. And met my wife Lisa, my wonderful wife Lisa, who was doing pre-med biology at CMU, and she went to med school at Hershey Med School, and I worked a year in a coal chemicals plant in Clairton, Pennsylvania. And after working with coal chemicals, I decided, yeah, I want to go to law school, and applied and got into my first choice, which was Dickinson Law School in Carlisle. It was close to where Lisa was, and we had a great 3 years experience, out in Central PA.
And we still
So
thank her for you joining us.
we can thank her for a lot of things. She's been amazing, very influential. So when I went to law school, Daryl, I didn't really know really what I wanted to do, right? Law school is a perfect place, especially Dickinson, right? to experience different things, you know. All I know is after I left CMU, I was a terrible writer. I was still very shy. It's one of these, you know, kind of like the humbling Chinese culture, right? Where, you know, you don't speak up, right? Unless you're really forced to speak up, right? So law school is kind of scary, you know, this whole Socratic method. I don't know if you still teach like that, Daryl. You know, getting called on was really scary in law school, right? You know, so, you
I
know,
practice warm calling, not cold calling. So they're all chill. No pun
Is
intended.
that oh great. You're a great professor. So went to law school, didn't know how to write. All I knew how to do was technical writing, sort of like writing a recipe for how to like, use a Bunsen burner and, burning a chemical in a test tube. That was really what I learned in college. So wasn't a very good writer. Um, and then went to law school, and I just remember, you had intro to legal writing, right? And I think, and he was very influential in my career. Harvey Feldman, Professor Feldman, had his class, had him for property, and I had him for intro to legal writing. And he looked at my writing and he goes, Nolan, we need to work on this. This is first semester, right? And he was very influential in making me a good writer. Taught me a lot and survived, the intro to legal writing class. And law school was just a wonderful experience to me because it really took my weaknesses, you know, I found out what the weaknesses were and I strengthened them, like, getting in front of people and speaking, raising your hand, nothing that I would ever want to do, but I learned how to do that in law school, and that really set my career going forward. So I think Dickinson, this is not an advertisement for Dickinson, but it really is. It's been a wonderful experience for me. And then Lisa and I graduated at the same time, med school and law school, and came back to Pittsburgh because Lisa was from Pittsburgh, and she matched in residency out here in Pittsburgh. I found my first job at Thorpe Reed and Armstrong, and as a patent attorney, um, and I did that for a number of years, and then after 2 or 3 years at Thorpe Reed, I got interviewed by the head of patents for Bayer Chemicals, Bayer Corporation, headquartered in Pittsburgh. And that was like 1996 back then. That's when I had my first daughter, Christina, and interviewed there. And that was a wonderful experience, Daryl, because I learned how to become a patent attorney for 3 years. And then being in a large company, um, their theory was that they hired me because I had the opportunity to become the head of patents eventually when Joe Gill, who's the head of IP, was going to retire. Well, Joe Gill interviewed me in 1996, and he didn't retire until like 2009. So during that period of time, I learned how to become a patent attorney. I learned a lot from Joe and his crew, his team. But then the really monumental part of my career, Daryl, and I remember this very clearly, was the management group at Bayer came to me and said, Nolan, we really want you to expand your horizons, we think being a patent attorney is great at Bayer, but we really want you to think about being a corporate lawyer. So would you consider moving into the corporate legal world? And you know what, Daryl, my answer was, I went to talk to my Joe Gill, who was the chief patent guy, and he goes, nah, no, you're going to become me, right? So do you really need to do this, right? That was my excuse for being lazy and not take chances. And I said no. Okay. And I said no, I'd rather just stay a patent attorney, which was a great career. Did that. 2 months later, the chief administrative officer came to my office and said, Nolan, he goes, you're going to take this role. You're going to become a corporate lawyer. And I go, okay, I'll do it. You know, um, it was scary because I was leaving the patent group to become part of the corporate legal group, right? Which was like, a whole other side of things, right? And it was quite a venture. I had to learn, legal topics which I never knew, like how to read a contract, supply agreement. Um, I had to teach antitrust issues, because we were a large corporation. I had to go, within the 2 years of being a corporate lawyer, I had to travel to Asia and all parts of the world to teach antitrust training, which was such a great experience. So I did that for about 5 years. I learned how to deal with non-technical people. I learned how to deal with marketing people, the CEOs, chief marketing officers, a whole different skill set. And then my the boss who hired me did retire, and they go, Nolan, would you we'd like you to come back and run the IP side now. This was about 2008. And I go, well, can I do that? But can I still be a corporate lawyer? So Bayer gave me the opportunity to do both. So I was a chief IP counsel as well as being a corporate lawyer, for different divisions within Bayer. And that was a really fun time there. I really enjoyed doing that because now I was able to merge IP and corporate together. So as you know, as an IP lawyer, right? IP lawyers who are watching this, one of the things we do is we draft joint development agreements, right? For our clients, right? You work on a technology with a third party, and how do you split up the IP? And if you actually jointly develop an IP, what happens afterwards, right? You enter into a supply relationship. Well, now as a corporate lawyer, I can draft a supply agreement also that comes with a joint development agreement, so you can consider both aspects of it. So it was a lot of fun. It was a great training, and did that and until about 2012, and decided at that time, being at Bayer for 18 years and loving it, that there was an opportunity for me to join Cohen and Grigsby, which was the firm that did all of our corporate work. And I had a really great mentor at Cohen Grigsby, Chris Carson, who taught me a lot. So he brought me in, to Cohen Grigsby, and had a wonderful opportunity to lead the IP group there, grow it, and then grew my team. Have a wonderful team, and just a year ago, we decided that it was time for, change, build up some bench strength, and we've been at Eckert, for a year now and enjoying every minute of it. So that's my
Wonderful.
short story, Daryl.
And I must say that I had the privilege of hearing the longer version over an entire weekend. And you so kindly hosted me when I visited that weekend with you. So let's go back a little bit. Actually, I learned a few new things. So you have probably had very good Chinese food growing up with your mom running a restaurant and all of that. And was this in Oklahoma or in
No, so
New
so
Jersey?
this yeah, this was in New Jersey, right? So my dad, started, finished, he was going for a PhD program, and then he ended up with a master's at Oklahoma. And then because my mother was pregnant with me, he decided that he couldn't continue his PhD, so he actually had to work. So I caused him not to get his PhD. So then, he got a position over in New Jersey, New York at Bristol Myers Squibb. Back then it was ER Squibb and Sons. And we went over there. I mean, every weekend, we went to New York City, Chinatown, right? For great Chinese food. And and my mom is a fabulous cook. She's really good. And so yeah, I grew up with no shortage of good Chinese food, and you know, and so had a good time there.
So you talked about your dad saying to you, I want you to be better than me and I want you to be an engineer. When you thought of law school, did you talk to them and what did they say?
The law school aspect was really interesting, right? Because it was not very common at that time for someone at CMU who was in the pure technical school. Law school wasn't really even on, let's say the counseling part of CMU, right? For someone to go into law school. And in talking to my parents about it, they were kind of like, well, okay, that's good. I mean, going to law school is good because you're getting a further graduate degree. But I'll tell you, the true folks who were very influencing on my part were Lisa's parents, Ed and May Huang. They were the ones who really knew the value of law, the further graduate degree. In fact, their other daughter, Trisha, is a lawyer also. So they have been very big proponents of their kids, going to law school and the value of a law degree. And so I give them a lot of credit for it. And for someone like me, and like I said before, it was just a completely different training for me. And Daryl, to be honest with you, I had considered, going into a whole bunch of different graduate route. I took the GREs, right, to go get a, master's in engineering. I took the GMATs to potentially go to business school, right? But finally determined that LSATs, taking the LSATs were, and then going to Dickinson was the perfect way to go. Yeah.
And so for folks that don't know, that means that his whole family has got Penn State connections on both sides, from Noland
Absolutely.
and from Lisa.
Absolutely.
But then none of your kids went to Penn State.
No, and none of them are lawyers either, Daryl. It's like I've tried and I failed. Maybe they succeeded. So my oldest daughter decided to follow my wife's footsteps. My wife's a pediatrician, right? So my oldest daughter is doing her residency in peds and child and adult psych in New York City at Mount Sinai. My middle one's a teacher, so she's going to be a teacher for special ed. And then my little one, who just graduated from CMU, who I thought I could convince to be a lawyer, right? You know, um, just because she's got a very quick wit, and I'll be kind, she's got a very quick wit, and she decided that she's doing a doctorate program in occupational therapy at Mass General right now, so just moved her there. So really proud of all of them. They decided that they didn't want to be lawyers. Yeah,
Well, they're all great. Maybe Penn State will get lucky with the next generation.
absolutely, definitely, definitely.
So then you graduate and you have this career transition, which is remarkable and all within a fairly short amount of time, relatively speaking. And you make some really important decisions about uh, is it going to be patents? Am I going to move into something more general corporate? And it sounds like they convinced you not the first time, but the second time. What was going through your mind in saying, okay, I'm going to make that transition, and and this is how I'm preparing myself for that transition.
For well, see the first transition, right, which I'll go was back in law school, right? Because I was considering, being a tax lawyer, or an immigration lawyer, right? Because of the Asian part in dealing with the different cultures. I thought being an immigration lawyer would be fun. I thought about tax, right? Because of reading, this is the nerdy part of me, right? Like numbers, reading codes. That's got to be really exciting career, tax, right? And then also, estates and trusts, and then, and environmental because of my engineering and public policy background at Carnegie Mellon, which is very focused on, environmental aspects like, at that time was disposal of used motor oil, which is one of our big tasks. I was thinking about environmental, but I'll tell you, there was a professor at Dickinson, and he was the one who taught all the IP courses at Dickinson, and he was so instrumental with his classes and acted as a mentor and guided me. And the mind slipping, his name is slipping my mind right now. I'll remember shortly. But he was the one who convinced me that a career in IP was the way to go. It was fascinating, and because of him, I applied to become a patent attorney, took the patent bar exam, and and my career has been the same since then. And then the second part was when I got the Bayer. When the transition was going from a patent attorney to a corporate lawyer, that one was interesting, right? Because, um, like once I went into the corporate world, was there a question in my mind that I would ever enter back into the patent world, right? Because you're learning a whole new skill set. You're dealing with a whole new set of clients. Your clients are not inventors anymore, those research folks. Your clients are now marketing folks, people who are making quick decisions, people with different, personality traits too, right? And I like that also, right? But while I was doing that, I was also missing the the skill set of looking at a new invention, how do you break things down? Because being an IP attorney, being a patent attorney, one of the things you gotta love to do is what makes things tick, right? And I miss that. And so that's why when, I was leaving the corporate world and becoming, the head of IP for Bayer, I love that part of it, right? Because I could go back and work with the inventors, promote, the skill set that I learned, Daryl, from being a corporate lawyer is working with marketing folks and now taking that and becoming the IP head for, Bayer and now using those skills to monetize IP. We started looking at how do you license IP that Bayer had? How do you promote inventor recognition? How do you market it? And all those things was what I could take from being a corporate lawyer to now being, in the IP world at Bayer. So it was really a nice, learning of a skill set and applying that skill set into the IP world, the technical world that I never had before.
Thanks. Let's talk about two more transitions to complete the cycle. The first is when Cullen and Grigsby and Dentons became a unit, and then when you decided to move to Eckert. So let's talk first about the Dentons bit. How did that transition happen, and how did you lead through that transition?
Oh, that was a lot of fun. We at Cohen and Grigsby, right? We had two offices. We were located in Pittsburgh and we had a Florida office. So the IP side was, was my group and it was contained in Pittsburgh, with 4 or 5 professionals, and then mostly in the chemical side with one senior attorney in the electrical side. When we became part of the Denton side, it was amazing, Daryl, right? Because all of a sudden, it was sort of like I was working at a global Bayer organization, right? Now I had colleagues, that I could now develop a network with all across the world, right? And Singapore is a favorite country of ours, right? And Dentons had a wonderful Singapore office, where I was becoming, good friends with like Gilbert Leong, and Catherine Lee, and that network, which I didn't have as a small Conor Grigsby firm, now as a Dentons firm, was fantastic, and I love that, and we became this global IP practice,
Why did they pick you, Nolan?
well, I mean, to be honest with you, like, when we, became part of Dens, right? All the different offices, had, heads of IP groups. We all became co-chairs. Okay. So the head of IP folks, at these different offices, there were probably 4 or 5 of us, right, became co-chairs of the national IP practice. And then there was when we became part of Dens, there was this global chair, Song, right? In DC office, who was wonderful and welcomed us. He's no longer at Dens today, but together, all of us, working with all the different heads of IPs in all the different countries, became this global IP team. And what we would do is, work together and try to figure out, how do we promote the Dentons brand? How do we promote the Dentons IP brand? And it was fantastic, really, just getting together with them, and I became part of the Dentons integration team in the U.S., and that was a great way for me to learn from other people in the different offices, because it was really like a merger, right? Of many different practices. So how do you take different practices, platforms, and skill sets and merge them so that's very efficient. So that was an ongoing and constant process, which I really enjoyed a lot and got to meet a lot of folks.
And
So,
how did they pick you as in Cohen and Grigsby, the firm, to merge with out of all the other firms in Pittsburgh or that region?
well, I think Conan Grigsby, right? And I have a lot of friends there, and I miss that firm. It's a great firm. Is has a very very strong practice, right? And I think with the size that it was, with what some of the strengths it was looking at, like the corporate practice, and all that. It was just a really great fit for what Dentons was looking at. And Dentons, what I think at that time was looking to find, different locations located, concentrated, sort of like the Midwest, the central part, not the outside cities, right, like New York, Chicago, because they already had offices. So it was basically to try to find, very good, law firms, that, were sort of small to mid-size, that could, service, clients all over the world. So Code and Grigsby just met a lot of, the features and functions and efficiencies and quality that Dens was looking at.
So then you move from Dentons to Eckert. Talk about Eckert's size and scale compared to Dentons and what that meant in terms of the culture, the transition, the thought process in you deciding this was a good move.
That's right. So part of Dens, right, is now we're part of this global organization, right, with global, global culture thinking, and part of being the global part of it, right, is that you have more conflicts too, right, because there's, we have so many lawyers, right, and at that time, when we were looking, I was looking for growth for my team. What firm, right, would allow us to continue to grow, and which we were doing at Dentons, Cohn and Grigsby. And Eckert Seamans is not a global firm like Dentons is, right? But it's, Eckert Seamans has, more than 10 offices, 10 locations, primarily on the East Coast, right? And in terms of lawyers, it's bigger than Cohn and Grigsby, right? But certainly not as large as Dentons. So certainly more focused on the U.S. side of the practice. But what attracted us to Eckert Seamans, and there's a lot of great firms out there, was that it had a really, Eckert Seamans has been around for a long time, had an established culture. A lot of the IP attorneys within Pittsburgh, this region, were trained by, a patent attorney located here at Eckert Seamans who passed away. His name was Arnie Silverman. So there's a long tradition and history of, Eckert Seamans and its practicing IP. And my team was primarily focused on the chemical bio, practice, with our expertise. And when I was at Cohn Grigsby, one of the things we were looking at was trying to find electrical and computer engineers, right? That's the holy grail of patent attorneys. And I was looking for 12 years, Eckert Seamans, that's their strength. They have an IP group, that, is complete, right? But the strength of it is the electrical computer engineer team that they have here, which perfectly then complements our chemical bio practice, And so now, as part of this team of probably, 20 to 30 IP professionals here in this organization or more, we have, all the industries covered, with very, very strong professionals in this firm. That, you come to us with a technology, Daryl, we should be able to learn it and cover it and protect it, um, so then very established practice. Then we met, as we were going through this process, we met with the management, and the management with how fast they move, with their energy level, blew us away, and just in terms of rolling out, understanding what we needed, and to me, that was a strong selling point that they really understood what we as an IP group needed. They understood that my team, with some young and experienced professionals, needed different things, but they had a platform to support all that. And Dennis Cohn and Grigsby certainly had that, but it was more, more of a global scale now, where, in a more regional firm, where it was tied, I thought very much more, with the regional community, we had more room to grow and to really, everybody, I think in my group in that year being here has really grown significantly and learned a lot. And I think vice versa. I think, the rest of the firm and the IP group has also learned from what we bring in, as a, IP team and as a global organization in the past. So it's been great synergistic, working
Wonderful.
together.
Can you talk about that transition from the perspective of your team as individuals when they were moving over? I'm sure they were excited, but they also had concerns. How did you manage that? But also your clients that were coming over with you also, I'm sure excited about prospects, but also had concerns.
Right. I think you know me, Daryl, well enough is that my relationships with folks, right, are the most important thing to me, right? Whether it's clients or my team. And I'm very close to my IP team. A lot of them have been together with me. I've trained a lot of them. And we always function as kind of like one, I sound like a science fiction movie, one, organism, like we think alike, we care about each other, and so it was hard, right? Because when you're going through the process of interviewing, you sort of have to leave, part of ethics, right? You have to leave people in the dark, right? Um, but while I interviewed, um, it was one of those things where after, I left Conan Grigsby, the opportunity came up where, Eckert then went off to, went to everyone in, my team and asked them whether they would come. Um, that was always my goal, was to find a place which would take the entire team. There were plenty of firms out there that were wonderful, great fits, right? But some of them, couldn't take the entire team because of financials and so on, right? But Eckert Seamans was one of the firms that understood that we worked so well together and that as a team, we were, very strong, powerful in terms of what we would do. And they saw that. So where I'll give Eckert credit is that they acted very quickly, in many ways, right? Getting offer sheets out, and then once I joined Eckert, which was a couple of days after I left Conan Grigsby, um, Eckert, had all the administrative platforms and folks in place where if I needed to, send an engagement letter out to a new client or to bring a client in, it was all there. They didn't bog me down with training, right? Like, oh, you got to watch this training, Nolan, for the next week, and learning how the system was, right? Eckert was smart enough just to say, no, do what you need to do, right? And probably one of the most beautiful things in my career, right? One of the things that I still will never forget is that, you know, out of my team, right? There were a couple of folks who stayed at Conan Grigsby, right, for their own reasons, which made sense. But I had two of my paralegals came over, and then four other professionals came. So basically, my whole team came, um, and um, and the transition was wonderful because now we as a team, had in front of us like, well, what do we do now, right? We're at zero, right? But we sat together, and again, Daryl, it's all about relationships, right? The relationships you have with your team and the relationships you have with your clients, right? Um, you know, my team, it's not like I was a leader, right? It was my team. We all sat together. We go, these are our friends, our clients, right? And let's tell them about the new opportunity we have. Let's tell them, not why they shouldn't stay at Dentons, but what is it about us and why we came to Eckert, And that's all we had to do. All we had to do was just reach out to them, say, hey, we're at Eckert, and because of those relationships and friendships we built and the trust that we built, it was very successful. All I'll say, it was very successful in terms of what we've been able to build, our friends that have come over, the new friends that we built, and Eckert Seamans made that transition perfectly smooth and wonderful. And to this day, a year later, um, it's just it was the perfect move for us to come, and we're all very happy. Thanks for asking.
Oh, my pleasure. So follow-up question, you were talking about how the people on your team. They were team members. You're not so much a leader, but one among, I suppose, and you didn't say this, but I'm paraphrasing, the first among equals, shall we say. Uh, But there's a mentorship process involved in how you pick your team, how you grow your team's potential. Can you talk about that aspect of your role as a leader?
Yeah, the role as a leader is just to set an example, right? And you've been a mentor, and part of being a leader, right, is that you function as a mentor, but you also function, which is very important. I'll quote a friend of mine, Noland Cheung, right, who wrote this book on sponsorship, right? The difference between mentorship and sponsorship, right? And and you know, with my team, right? You when you pick your team, right, you always try to pick folks that you believe have, like similar like values and beliefs, right? And what do I look for, Daryl, right? So I look for folks who are, obviously everyone's intelligent, so look for someone who's intelligent. But the skill set is people who I look for folks who like other people, who want to build relationships with people. Um, you know, you know, IP attorneys are generally very technical, right? Like I was and still am. I still believe I'm very introverted in many ways, right? And you have to take yourself out of the comfort zone, but yet you have to believe in your core values. And I like people. I like knowing what Daryl had for lunch today or what you drank, tea this morning, right? And that is so important. And so I look for people who want to build relationships and build trust with, whoever they're dealing with. But it has to be genuine. You don't do this just because you're like looking for business. Like I could, build a relationship with someone, but I really don't care if I have their business or not. I'm trying to build a friendship and network of people I know. That's the most important thing. And so I look for people like that. And the team that I built, Lisa, Mark, Cody, Gary, and then Angela, Cheryl, and so on, and Jen, they all have those traits, and they all care so much about other people. So as a leader, I have to set an example of being consistent and showing my genuineness, right? And if I weren't genuine about caring for them by coming to Eckert, they probably wouldn't have come with me, and this would have probably all fallen apart. But because they came, believed in, who I was and what I was looking for in a place to land, that set an example. So setting an example. So once they got here, it wasn't me like saying, "Oh, we need to do this," right? My team was setting up meetings where we would all get together and think about what we need to do going forward. So we do this as a team. Um, and I think one of the most important things, Daryl, about being a leader is you have to be open, you know, because as a leader, you don't know everything. And the worst leader can be one that's so stubborn that they just won't change. My leadership is morphed into, just sort of what the team thinks, take the best ideas, make sure things get done, because someone has to say yes or no, right? So that's pretty much what it is. But everyone feels comfortable with me and coming and talking to me, and we get together as a team. And that's the strength of working as a unit together as a family. I call us a family, my work family. And we trust each other to the T, and we get things done. So our family now is not just our team, but includes the rest of Eckert. First the IP team of Eckert, and now the family has expanded into the other, legal areas, within Eckert. So I think that's what we have brought into this firm of how we react and do things.
So speaking of family, when you had to make this monumental move with your entire team, what role did your immediate family, Lisa and the girls, have in that deliberation process?
Very, very much so. Lisa and I, Lisa's my buddy, right? Yeah, as you know, and we make every decision together because I value her. She knows me more than anyone else, right? And so she knew, that I was in this spot where, that, I was looking at further growth, right? And, and so where was the further growth going to be? Where was, being able to keep the team together going to be? And she knew that my happiness was going to go to Eckert, and she fully supported that, and uh, and so she goes to me today. She goes, no, you're just so happy, and I was happy at Dens also, but it's a different type of happiness. The happiness I have now is seeing my team and seeing how they grow and seeing your potential in this firm, and seeing how the firm has latched on to the folks in my team and utilizing them and making them grow. So I'm getting a lot of satisfaction and happiness from being here. Uh, so she's instrumental. She won't let me buy any toys until I talk to her. So I mean, I'd be spending all our budget on Legos, but everything Lisa and I talk together about.
Why Legos? For you or for somebody else?
Well, for me, come on, I gotta have toys, So look, my goal, right, is like Lego modular buildings, right? So they have these buildings like the Parisian restaurant. So, so my goal is, to slowly buy these because they're not cheap and build
Do
like a
you
whole
have a
city.
room that you set up all this, but you store all your Lego?
I keep turning the basement into more Lego spots, When next time you come over, I'll show you. Yeah. So there's a part of me too. I actually have unbuilt Lego boxes like the space shuttle that I keep in the basement, and I keep telling Lisa, I go, this was a good deal, Lisa. It was on sale. So I go, in 30 years, I'm going to sell this on eBay. She goes, yeah, right. So yeah.
Well, as far as vices go, I think that's a harmless one.
Yeah, like Legos are pretty good. I mean, and it's technical too, right? You think about these blocks and you think about the technology. It's fascinating, in terms of the IP that goes along with Legos. And
Absolutely.
you know,
So I
and then
also
and
want to
then yeah,
go ahead.
good. Yeah.
I want to talk about your community service, right? You serve with the Carnegie Museums, the Carnegie Science Center, and the Advanced Leadership Institute. So how does all of that, well, tell us first of all about each of those, your role in them, but how does it influence your leadership approach?
Right. So these are wonderful uh, parts of my career. They have so much value to me, in terms of doing this, and it's helped me grow as a person also. And um, I started off as the Carnegie Science board member through my role at Bayer as the chief IP counsel. So then I became it was a natural fit, right? Being part of the Carnegie Science Center advisory board. And then being a part of that board, I later became the chair of the board. And then by virtue of being the chair of the board, I became then a trustee of the Carnegie Museums. And the Carnegie Museums encompass the four museums of Pittsburgh, which is natural history, Andy Warhol, let's see, art, I think natural history, I said, in the Science Center, So all four of those museums are part of the Carnegie Museum system. And so that being the board member of that has been so wonderful, right? Because on the advisory board, right, your fellow board members are chief technology officers, right? R&D folks, right? Folks who are just have the same common good of promoting science, science to kids, right? How do you get kids interested in science so they can become the future inventors and scientists of the world, which is what we need, more R&D, more research. And then as part of the trustee side, you get to see how the overall museum is run. And your fellow trustees then are, folks who run foundations, folks who just care so much about the community. And I'll tell you, Daryl, like someone like me, right, comes from a humble, scientist father, Asian Chinese mother, restaurateur beginnings, right? For me to be part of this group of people, um, trustees and board members who care so much about the community, who have done so much more in their careers and philanthropy more than I ever have. And to be one of them and to learn how they do things and how they love the community has really taught me a lot, has really, and so their principles of how they support the community has really taught me how to do that and to take that and to become a better sponsor and mentor and to be a better community leader. So there's that part of it. And then TALI, which is the Advanced Leadership Institute, is an organization that was, promoted to help, Black executives and their allies in terms of, um, you know, giving them more skill sets, networking, promoting, keeping them in Pittsburgh in this region, and helping them grow within the organizations they're at. And as part of that board, which I'm so honored to be a part of, which is run by Evan Frazier, who's just a darling friend and leader. I'm in the board with, leaders and CEOs of company, and so as part of that organization, I get to see how they function as leaders, how they think, issues, and how they're promoting being a mentor sponsorship. And taking all that, you use that and you try to apply it to what you do every day here at the firm, how you function as a parent too, right? Because all these skill sets are what you do in your daily lives as a parent, husband, or as a fellow attorney, in a firm. So it's been a great experience for me, and I love the community service aspect of my life.
It's amazing how you bring what goes on at the board level to the firm level, even to the family level.
it,
Uh,
it's all what makes you who you are, right?
mm,
It really is. It's like you have to be true to yourself. And again, it's like what is the what core principles do you have as an individual? And you take the best of what you see and apply what works for you, you know, without changing who you are. Because if you ever change who you are, you don't become genuine anymore, right?
mm.
So you take all of that, and just sort of, try to be the best person you can, be an example, and just constantly change every day, like what keeps making you better, you know. Um, sometimes being a philanthropist is not all about just how much money you give, right? But it's how involved are you, and how, where can you get involved, And so, that's one thing that I would tell younger, folks coming up, you know, get involved in the community, learn from all the people that you meet. Treat anyone that you meet anywhere, right? Whether it's someone running the elevator, someone who's, on the floor as a security guard. Treat everyone as someone who you really want to learn what they do and who they are. That's how I've, gone through life, to do that.
That's wonderful. I was going to ask you about advice to young associates, but it sounds like that's something that you would say. Of course, happy if you want to add anything to that, but also want to give you the last word in just, if you like, drawing a thread through your entire life experience and just leaving our viewers with one thing that you've thought about reflecting on your life so far.
Yeah. I mean, you know, um, I think it's an experience that you go through life, right? And I think as I was younger, um, I was more timid, right? I was afraid to speak out, and through experience in old age and less of a filter as you get older, right? You start speaking out more. Um, I don't think I took a lot of chances, fortuitously. Bayard made me take the chance of becoming a corporate lawyer, and it was one of the best decisions I ever made. Um, and you know, and so I think that, what I would tell folks is, you know, keep your core being, like I said, true to yourself and who you are. Genuinely care about people, and but at the same time, don't be afraid to speak out. Don't be afraid to, and this is the Asian community in general, right? I think the younger generation of Asian, like you, Daryl, are much more inclined to speak up, right? But me being in the older generation, it's kind of like let's be humble. Let's not speak up unless we're asked to, because we're afraid that we're going to say something wrong, right? And then really embarrass ourselves or our family. Um, but I know my kids are not like that anymore, and so I would say keep doing that. I think stand up for yourself, I think is huge, right? Because I think if you don't stand up for yourself, it'll be looked at as you're being passive, and you'll usually get looked over, for someone who is speaking up. Because if you don't speak up, the other party may think you just don't care. So I think it's very important to speak up, set an example to everyone that's part of your circle, whether it's folks that work with you, your family, management, just, be true to yourself, be consistent in who you are, be consistent in, how you set an example. That's what I'll say is the biggest thing. Lisa and I are very consistent in our morals. Our kids always know, pretty much would always know where we stand on things. And I think that helps, in terms of, they know, okay, mom and dad are not going to be mad. They're going to be fine, And so it's the same thing within a workforce environment. It's the same thing too. You want to be ethical, you always want to think about what to do right. You always want to think about, what your clients find as value, right? You always want to be responsive to whenever anyone asks you for an inquiry. Those are the core sets of things that you have to be consistent at. So that's what I would say. Practice that.
Thank you. Well, on behalf of this program, I want to thank you for your time, but also wish you all the best in this exciting new chapter at Eckert Seamans. And look forward to you continuing to stay in touch with the school and with our IP and innovation initiatives. And thank you for all that you do.
Daryl, thank you for everything you do. Appreciate you.
Thank you.